Hello, welcome to Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob. This is going to be a relaxed video and podcast. So if you are watching this back on YouTube or as a VOD on Twitch, where we're currently recording with a live studio audience, the Twitch chat, like the Iceman who just subscribed, thank you very much. And you're listening to this back as a podcast. Thanks very much for enjoying my content. I really appreciate you. Thanks to everyone on the Wargamer Patreon for helping support me so I can make more content. It's appreciated. Today we're going to be doing a tier show, a classic whodunit for YouTube. YouTube people love a tier show. So we're going to be doing a tier show, and we're going to be doing them on the endless spells from the new GHB. They had a pretty big rewrite with the new General's Handbook, which came out a few weeks ago, and these should last over the course of the next GHB. The endless spells are spells, obviously, that can be taken by wizards. If you're playing a 2,000-point match-point game, don't forget you can only include 3 endless spells in your army. To cast an endless spell, you need to match or beat its casting value that's on its war scroll. It counts as a spell when you cast it, so if you've got bonuses to casting rolls or bonuses to cast spell range, you could set them up further, so that's something to remember. Endless spells move if they're predatory. Some aren't predatory. Move at the end of your hero phase, but before end of hero phase abilities happen. That's something really important to remember, which some people will get wrong. So that's something else that's also super important. In order to stop an endless spell, you only need to roll above its casting value, not what your opponent rolled. So if it's only cast on a 5, but I rolled an 11 to cast it, my opponent doesn't need to roll a 12 to stop it, like you normally would if casting a spell. They do when they're unbinding the spell. Like when I initially cast it and I roll an 11, they do have to roll a 12. But subsequently, when I try to dispel an endless spell, that's what it's called, I only need to beat its casting value, which is cool. You can dispel them outside of 30 inches. You have to dispel them at the start of the hero phase. That's something also important that you got to remember as well. You have to pay points for endless spells. Loads of these endless spells are sold out across the world. I would just kit bash my own personally. Some of them look cool, some of them look terrible. I think that's pretty much everything that you'll need to know about endless spells. Some are predatory. I think I've covered most of the stuff, or most of the stuff we'll need for the tier show. But we'll bring up anything else that you need to as we go through. A shout out to the chat. I'm going to be talking to the chat as we go through this, which is fun. And I'm looking forward to doing this because there's some fun stuff in here. So what we're going to do, there was a leaked version of the GHB Online, so I'm just going to use this for now, just because I haven't finished making mine. And we're going to go through these. Blank Wizard, thanks for resubscribing in the chat. Loads of love. Kit bashes of endless spells are way more primal as well. That is true. Hashtag primal. Way more primal, so it's super worth talking about. Okay, so first of all, we're going to start with Horrorgas, which made it into the S tier in my last endless spell tier video in the last GHB, but some of the rules have changed. This one hasn't changed. So if someone in the chat can remind me the points for these, this would be great. So this is cast on a 5, so it's easy to cast. But don't forget this GHB, a lot of people are using primal dice, hashtag primal. Therefore, if you're trying to, and you can use primal dice to try to dispel a spell. I would say as a general rule, I won't bring this up again, it's going to be much easier to get rid of endless spells in this GHB than it was ever in Age of Sigmar, and so probably their effectiveness is much lower because you're going to get rid of them much easier, unless they have a long threat range on the first turn. That's the turn in which you cast it, which is where you can roll high and your opponent is going to have a more difficult time trying to stop you. But when they're rolling just dispel dice, super easy. Final bit with endless spells. If you dispel an endless spell in that turn, it can't be recast in that turn, if that makes sense. So a trick to use if your opponent wants to use an endless spell is to dispel it in their turn, meaning that they can't cast it again in that turn. So they miss out a couple of turns of it, which helps. Do you still have the old chart? Interested to compare old and endless spells depending on the current meta. Yeah, I did have the old chart, but it was this chart originally, which I did. I don't know if I end up going out of it. I have reset it now. I don't know if it's going to have stored it. Oh, maybe. Is this me? No, I've reset it, unfortunately. So I did have a version from the previous one, but I'm afraid not. So first one we're going to do is Horrigast. Horrigast. Okay, spooky spell. It's Nagash's head, clearly meant to be. Thanks Warhammer Rob for resubscribing. Remember, this is a few battle tactics that interact with Ender spells now. Yes, there are also some battle tactics that interact with Ender spells as well. That's super worth talking about. It really, really is. Okay, so Horrigast, Predatory. It's cast on a 5 and a range of 12 inches. So that means you set it up within 12 inches. That's what that means. And it's got a really low casting value, so you're going to cast it. And then it's a Predatory Ender spell. So this means it's going to move at the end of the hero phase before end of hero phase movements. And it can move 8 inches. So immediately set it up within 12, moves 8 inches. That's 20 inches. And then its effect range of its ability Prey on Fear is 12 inches. Units cannot receive commands in the Battleshock phase while they're within 12 inches. So no Inspiring Presence, which means you can ignore the effects of a Battleshock test. In addition, if a unit fails a Battleshock test while it's within 12 inches of any Ender spells, with this ability, add D3 to the number of models that flee. Now, this Ender spell costs 60 points, thanks to Aldem in the chat. This is pretty interesting, actually, because I've always liked this, but you need to talk about those units, or the units that are in the game right now, and if there are loads of low bravery units in the game that this is going to affect. The first thing that springs to mind is Gloomspite Gits, because they normally have lots of models in those armies, and making them suffer a ton of damage, and then Battleshock is good because they have a low bravery, and then an additional D3 models is running away. Particularly good in things like Trogs, as an example. Games Workshop has always given units low bravery, and then also given you the ability to punish units with low bravery. That's always been something that they've done. So some armies have always done worse because of that effect. But that's just something that's always been true. So this is kind of interesting, to be honest, because I'm just trying to think about the other armies in the game right now which might be affected by this. Mortal Khorne's a great shout. I love that idea. I like the idea that affects that. Affects KO a bit. Stormcast maybe affects them a little bit. Sylvaneth, they were very popular in the meta. Slaanesh, I think it would affect them. The reason that this, though, is effective, it affects all of the units in range. But you need to combine this with being able to do AoE damage, and that's on the rarer side. You don't generally tend to have a lot of AoE damage, as in you hit multiple, area of effect. You don't hit multiple different units all at the same time, because those abilities are fairly rare. So it feels like Seraphon really like this as well. And of course, Khorne liked the idea of this affecting them, thanks to the best GHB player in the world right now, Peter Tweak in the chat. Because obviously you get the spell ignore on Ender spells with Khorne as well. So any large blocks of units this is going to be good into, but you also need to be able to damage those large blocks as well. And you probably need to damage multiple large blocks. Although you could always use it to just hammer one unit, do enough damage to a single unit, and then also make them battle shock, and then also make D3 more run away. So the thing is I obviously know what all these Ender spells do, and we're going to talk about Geminids. And Geminids just goes there at the top. We don't need to talk about that now, because Geminids just does that same thing, but way better for cheaper. So that's actually kind of worse, but its effect range is really good, and I still think that it's really good inside of the meta in the right situation. And if in a team situation where you can guarantee who you're playing, or if you're playing your mate at home, then it's a great take in my opinion. So we are going to talk about Geminids, obviously, but we're going to just do that because this is worse because Geminids exists. Otherwise, I think it's just a great take. It's good. It's 60 points. It can affect your enemy. It can affect you as well. But I think this is really good. We're not going to do faction Ender spells today, but we can do if the chat and the people at home, the podcast people or the YouTube people, want me to do faction Ender spells as well. We could do that as well. But we're just not going to do that as well today. So I quite like this. I think this is a great take because I think it works in almost all situations. Some armies ignore it. I'm thinking Khorne and Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Ossiarch Bone Reapers because they ignore Battleshock tests anyway. I think it's really good. Really, really good. Okay. So what's the next one on the list? So it's quite fun. Aether Void Pendulum. Okay, let's work out how many points this bad boy is. So it's cast on a 6. It's got a range of 8 inches. And then if successfully cast, set up this end spell wholly within range of the caster. And with its end spell set up, pivot the model so that the tip of the pendulum blade is pointing in the direction in which you wish the end spell to move. Now it's predatory. It can either move forward or backwards along the line in which it's facing. It can move 8 inches and can fly, and when you move this end spell, it must move in a straight line in either direction. So one direction or the other. And after this end spell is moved, roll a dice for each unit that has any models that it passed across, or each other unit within an inch of it, and it's on a 2+, they suffer d6 mortal wounds. Okay, so it's got an effective range of 16 inches, set it up within 8, move 8 inches. But once you do move those 8 inches, so like you can keep moving those 8 inches again, so which is kind of okay. Question about the pendulum: when you move the end of spell, can you change its orientation when it lands? No, you definitely can't. You can't. Hey team, hello Mr. Nogel Matthew, hope you're doing well. D6 mortal wounds is good, and D6 mortal wounds isn't on a single model. It's 40 points, thank you as well in the chat. It's not on a single model. Okay, after this end of spells, roll a dice. Each unit that has any models that passed across it, and each other unit within an inch on a 2+ suffers D6 mortal wounds. So that's a lot of mortal wounds, like potentially, for what is a cheap points value of 40 points. In fact, you would be really hard pressed to find many other units in the game that could do remotely this amount of potential damage for 40 points. Like, you're going to do a ton. Just stick this in front of like, your opponent charges you, you set it up, you've got a 16-inch range, you could throw that right into a bunch of different units, it flies as well, and then do a ton of damage, because it's every unit within an inch at the end of its move. That's a lot. So that's a lot of damage. Now, it's quite interesting. We haven't really... What we normally see from Ender Spells is they're normally like economies of scale. So they like make units just way better in some ways. Obviously, we saw that with like Spell Portal or Cogs in the last GHB. But in this GHB, I'm not really certain right now. But I think this is good. Like, I think its points are cheap. And it does a potential. It does a potential huge volume of damage, which I think is good. And its range is okay. One of the things we should talk about right now, and I talk about this a lot at the minute, is everyone's like, my unit doesn't go from my backboard edge to their backboard edge, therefore it's incredibly slow. And I'm like, dude, all the objectives are in the middle. Just go there. If I deploy 11 inches on, I probably can cast this spell to the back of an enemy objective, right? And then in their turn, just dispel that spell, and then cast it again and just do a ton more damage. Being a large base, it's hard to fly over units with this 8-inch move. It's true. I agree. It's good in GHB that rewards you for killing stuff with spells. That's also true. Being a large base is difficult. That's a great shout, Rule of Cruel. I agree with that. Pendulum and Horrorgas combo, yeah, you could do both. Don't forget, you can only include an ender spell for each wizard in your army up to a maximum of 3. I would say it's in A. I would say it's a great take. In the right situation, doing a ton of damage, and it's so cheap, I think it's a great take. I really do. I really think it's a great take. So I don't think there's any argument for doing damage in this. Geomantic Cogs. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. It's a cast of 6 and a range of 6 inches, and it doesn't move. Okay. Mechanisms of time. When you set this in a spell, you must decide if it's an increasing or decreasing the flow of time. If it's increasing the flow of time, players can reroll charge rolls for friendly units while they're wholly within 12 inches of any friendly spells with this ability. So reroll charges for friendly units is not, in my personal opinion, a great ability. It's fine, but we already have a command ability reroll, so you can already reroll stuff, so I don't think you need this. Yeah, this is ruining... Yeah, thank you, Peter. Yeah, Tzeentch players in shambles. Lots Nagash players in shambles as well. being able to re-roll all your casts. What it previously did was it allowed you to slow down time and re-roll all of your casts. Every unit in range could re-roll their casts. And this is cost 50 points. I'm never going to spend 50 points on a re-roll, so I wouldn't take it slow down time. To speed up time. If I was going to decrease time, then if it's decreasing time, then players can attempt to cast either Arcane Bolt or Mystic Shield in their hero phase with a friendly wizard wholly within 6 inches of this end of spell without counting that spell towards the number of spells that wizard can attempt to cast in that phase. In addition, subtract 1 from hit rolls for shooting attacks that target wizard heroes while they're wholly within 6 inches of any end of spells with this ability. If a player has any friendly wizards within 6 inches of the end of spell at the start of the hero phase, they can either change this end of spell to increase or slow down time. So it lost its reroll casts. Way worse. Way worse. But you can attempt to cast a spell. There's only two situations where I think this is really relevant. This is in Tzeentch and this is in Seraphon. Specifically because in Tzeentch you'll get an extra fate point for casting that spell. And in Seraphon, if you're using that slan with the command trait that does additional celestial core points, if you're going second in a turn and they're near cogs, that means they're going to cast an additional 2 extra spells in this GHB, taking them up to 5 spells and 10 celestial core points, which is bonkers. But those are very situational. Where I don't think it's situational, and I think actually this is great, -1 from hit rolls for shooting attacks that target wizard heroes within range. Now this is only going to affect monstrous heroes, because obviously they've changed Lookout Sir. I think they changed Lookout Sir after they wrote this, so that you can no longer target any characters on foot, heroes on foot, as long as they're near a unit within 3 inches with 3 or more models. From outside you can't target them unless you're within 12 inches from shooting. So this just makes like that fairly redundant. But this works really well on like large casters from shooting. So Kairos, Croak, a lot of change. I don't know if there are any big casters at range, to be honest. Maybe Arcan, I guess. -1 to hit is never bad. But if they have a mount, then you could stack this up for -2 to hit a range. But it's a lot of points to do that, right? It's 50 points. So 50 points is a lot of points to make that happen. Not certain, I'm sure. So in the very right situation, I think it works. But I think in every other situation, I think even then those players, thank you so much, I think even then those players would struggle to justify it, in my personal opinion. So I think even the players that can take it would struggle to justify it. And only works best probably in Seraphon, I think is a fair statement. Our next endless spell is the Emerald Life Swarm, and it's got a range of 6 inches and a casting value of 6, and it's a predatory endless spell that moves 8 inches. So that gives it a 14-inch range when you cast it. And it's got the ability Bounteous Healing. After this endless spell has moved, the commanding player can pick 1 unit within 3 inches of it. They can heal up to D3 wounds allocated to that unit, or if no wounds are allocated to it, they can return a number of models to that unit that have combined wounds characteristic of D3 or less. Okay, so just waiting for the chat to tell me how many points this is, because I don't think I can remember. I think this is like over 50. So heal D3 or return D3 single wound models. So you got to ask yourself, can you 60 points? You got to ask yourself, do you need to spend 60 points to heal D3 all the time? Now, I think there's a situation where you could, but it's very rare. And it's not overly fast. Let's say you wanted to have it with a combat unit, which is the unit that's most likely to take most damage. Thanks, N.A. Brooks, for resubscribing. So you're going to run forward, and then you're going to be out of range of the Emerald Life Swarm really quickly to heal D3. If you're getting shot at range, then you're just going to do heroic action and do a recover. I think the armies that can already heal enough now that they don't need it to add on. But I think there is some situations, like a Moon Tyrannid in the chat says, loved it on Tzeentch Archeon. So being able to heal a big multi-wound model like that is good. Works well for Gotrek. Being able to heal Gotrek is fun. I like that. hide it and heal the primal miscast so it can't be unbound. That's pretty funny. When you could double tap this, it was legit good. That is also true, but you can't do that anymore. But you can do it each hero phase. And I don't hate the idea of having a monstrous hero that could be healed D3 every single hero phase. That's a significant. That's four wounds a turn. That can be really good. You just need the right survivable hero. So I think like things like Frost Lords and Stonehorn kind of make sense. But the problem is they're so mobile. They're so aggressive. They're running across the board so much. I think that's a major issue. And also it's 60 points. It's slow. It's difficult to keep up with. I would struggle. And then for healing like little characters, like D3 models back to a unit, I mean, it's not a bad shout. You'll be returning 4 models per battle round to a unit. But, you know, doesn't tend to be loads of elite units. And it's not per model. So I can't bring back like units with 2 wounds. It has to be like 1 model with 2 wounds or 3 models with 1 wound. So, like, I think if it's already got healing, they heal well enough. If it needs healing, it's probably too far away. So I just don't think I could. I don't think you can. I say don't take it, can't justify it. I don't think I can justify it at all. I think there's a fringe case where you take it in the right build because you just want to keep that healing up as much as possible. But I really can't think of a situation where I want it, in my opinion. So Lost Ogle says in the chat, good on Wizard Heroes at the minute and can sit back at the healing range units. Yeah, I guess in a world of primal miscasts, it's not a terrible idea to maybe stick it on a hero. Near a hero, just have them doing primal miscasts, taking damage, but also healing themselves. But you need something that's got like at least 7 wounds so they won't die immediately to the primal miscast. So, yeah, this is pretty rough. So I'd say I can't justify it. I'd say don't even take it. I say I can't justify it. I think I can't justify that one. Next up, the Geminids. R.I.P. the game. R.I.P. the game. Okay. This is, for some reason, 40 points. 50 points. 50 points for this. This needs to be immediately up to 80 to 100 points. We'll talk about why. It's got 2 parts to it. So its effective range is much bigger than you give it credit for, unlike the other endless spells. It's got a casting value of 6 and a range of 8 inches. And then the parts always need to be within 6 inches of each other. This endless spell is a predatory endless spell, which means it's going to move at the end of each hero phase, but before end of hero phase abilities. It can be moved up to 8 inches and can fly. So your initial range is 16 inches. The parts of this endless spell must be within 6 inches of each other. Okay? Tendrils of Shadow and Light. After this endless spell is moved, roll a dice for each unit that has any models that it passed across, and for each unit that's within an inch of this endless spell. On a 2+, that unit cannot issue or receive commands until the start of the next hero phase. Like, yeah, there's Elric in the chat has said, it's never been truer that they don't know how to point endless spells than this endless spell, and this is correct. So, why is this so effective, right? Mark in the chat saying 100 points would be fair on this. This is just crazy. So, you cast this in the hero phase, and it's going to move at the end of the hero phase. If you let this affect the enemy units in range, any enemy unit that's affected by this won't be able to do, in order, redeploy, or any command abilities in the movement phase, like a redeploy, any command abilities in the shooting phase, any command abilities in the charge phase, like reroll charges, any command abilities in the combat phase, like all-out attack, all-out defense, and any command abilities in the battle shock phase, like Inspiring Presence. So they just and also obviously you can't do Unleash Hell. So you and that's just the generic command abilities, not including all of the command abilities that they might want to do as an army. So this is massively effective. It's a game changer. Okay, so I mean, so Mark, now we had an event this weekend already. Don't forget. And Mark, who was our table boss at the weekend, and all of those videos are going up. The battle reports from all of those are going up on the Wargamer Patreon over the next week. But yes, Mark talks about, I saw this literally used by Seraphon, but it could have been any other magic shooting army like LRL or KO to delete 2/3 of a Trog army. Not doing Inspiring Presence was brutal, and it didn't allow them to do Inspiring Presence or even all-out defense to several different units. It's just so good. And thank you to Rob in the chat. There is an STL for Geminids online. If anyone is interested, there it is. From Spell Pack 2 by Ratman Forge. It's worth pointing out, I think. So it's just it could even get its own, it could even potentially get its own tier. It's so good. It's so good. And I don't think there's a situation where making your opponent not be able to do how opponents work, which is command abilities, or sorry, how armies work, which is command abilities, is ever going to be a bad thing. So, I would include this in your list, and then you would have to find a reason to justify it not being in your list. Like, if you say to your opponent can't redeploy out, which has been game-winning for some people, reroll charges so they don't get into charges, literally justify why it doesn't work in your list first. Put this in your list first, and then write other stuff after it. Feels like the fair thing. And especially with Primal Dice. Just yeet this bad boy in. All right, next. Geminids. Geminids is the best. Oh, this is causing another spell that's causing drama. The Malevolent Maelstrom. Causing absolute drama out there on the internet right now. This thing, would you include it if you already have effects to turn off command abilities? I mean, that's the thing. You with Geminids, you have to, if you're like, I'm already turning off all your command abilities somehow, then no. But, 30 points for this bad boy. 30 points, which is a great points value because it's almost something you can just chuck in your list for nothing. It's like 30 points. Okay, cool, I've got 30 points. Obviously, Triumphs are really good, but as I've said many times on the stream, Triumphs should be banned from competitive play. It's embarrassing that they're there from a game design perspective. And is really, really bad. So yeah, the mystical bollock. Maelstrom will be bonkers on Seraphon. We already saw that at the weekend. Alright, so it's cast on a 5, so it's easy to cast, but that does mean it's easy to dispel. And a range of 8 inches. If successfully cast up, set up this end of spell wholly within range of the caster. So, 8 inches. It's a Predator in the spell, though, and it moves 8 inches and can fly. So, 16 inches on the first turn when you cast it. Right, then you got Morbid Detonation. After this end of spell is summoned, place a d6 beside it with a 1 facing up. Each time a spell is successfully cast by a unit within 12 inches of this end of spell are not unbound after the effects of the spell have been resolved, increase the value of the dice beside this by 1 until it gets to 6. In addition, each time a model is slain within 12 inches of the spell, increase the value of the dice beside this end of spell by 1 to a maximum of 6. At the end of the phase in which this dice beside this end of spell reaches 6, this end of spell is removed from play. When this end of spell is removed from play, add 6 to the value of the dice beside it. Each unit within 12 inches of this spell suffers D3 mortal wounds. If it was a wizard, it's flat 3. Okay, so when you read it, you're like, okay, that doesn't sound great. And which is why I would have been put to 30 points. But let's talk about how it works. Okay, so you set up with an 8, and it moves 8. Right, that's pretty scary. So that's 16 inches. Then what you could do is, for instance, you could cast a bunch of spells, cast a bunch more spells near it, because you cast it in your hero phase. Then any other spells that you cast are going to power it up in the hero phase. Then at the end of that hero phase, what you do is you push it another 8 inches forward. So you could just tick that marker up to a number 5. Then your opponent, if they have any models that die near it, let's say you move it forward and you shoot one of their models that's near it and it dies, turns it up to a 6, and then blam, huge. Or you do but you're going to move it. So the ordering is the thing that's really important. Is you cast it and then it moves, which means you get to power it up, juice it up before you send it off. Send it off towards the enemy. It also means that they might not want to cast spells. So if you set this up within 12 inches of one of their casters, if one of their casters tries to cast a spell, that'll turn it onto a 6, and then it'll blammo into their army, which is just nuts. Now it only does 12-inch range. In addition, each time the spells, because it goes up to a maximum of 6, and you add 6 to it, right? Which is nuts. But yeah, because it's like a single point on the board, it's 12 inches from any point of it, so it has a huge radius, that it affects, but it's far away from your army because you've obviously pushed it 16 inches. So it's just really good. Yes, and in some armies, like where you can set it up further, Arcan is a good example, Seraphon are a good example, then this is going to be even more effective. And then it goes 22 inches in Seraphon before being dispelled. It always explodes even when unbound. Is it Croak that can dispel it at the end of the hero phase? Croak can, the Slan can dispel anywhere on the board, Dom. They don't need to measure range for doing. It explodes when unbound. It does explode when unbound. Hold on. When this end spell is removed from play. So at the top, when this end spell is removed from play. So when it's unbound. Yeah? I don't understand how this works. Okay. End spell. Put it on the board. Set it up within 8 inches. Cool. Put a 1 next to it. No drama. Any models near it, 12 inches, or any spells cast near it, turn that number up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you get to 6, it explodes automatically. And then you add 6 inches to it, which is 6 plus 6, 12-inch range. Everything within range takes D3 mortal wounds. If it's a wizard, it's 3. That's how it works. But when you dispel an ender spell, you remove it from play. So if there was only a 3 on the number and you dispelled it, you would add 6 inches plus 3 on the dice for 9 inches. Everything would take D3 mortal wounds. That's how it works. Super easy. When this ender spell is removed from play, and removed from play is dispelled. That's how it works. So if I could dispel this down, you're saying just paint more gluttons. Distill this down, I'm saying paint more gluttons. Of course, that's what I'm saying. You know it. It absolutely does because, unless you're a Zinch and then you can take control of it and send it back, you could. So for 30 points, it's really good because it doesn't affect you in the first turn. Because you can summon it and then send it away, which is nice. Which is quite nice. Do you think City's Sigmar Hallowheart could be good in the new GHB? Alex Jones in the chat. I think that the new City's Sigmar book will be out so soon that it doesn't really matter talking about it. So I'm going to say yeah, but you're going to get a new City's army soon with whole new rules. So maybe, but we don't know for now. I think this is A. Because not as many armies can manipulate how strong this will be. This feels like this is really strong. Because also, don't forget, it works on slain models. So there's ways to guarantee it working really well for you. But also having this work on slain models works really well with shooting armies as well. Move it 16 inches, put it near a unit you're going to shoot the screen. Shoot the screen, loads of models die near the screen, and then it blams into their army. Feels like a really good one. And it's so cheap. It's 30 points. What planet are they on? 30 points. Yeah, and like Lindry says in the chat, the fact that it still explodes when dispelled is super strong as well. You keep control of an ender spell if it's within 30 inches of the caster. So you're going to get to keep control of this death ball that's going to move around your opponent's army, following them round. If any models die or they try to dispel it, it's going to explode. It is army dependent. If you're an army that wants to go fast though and move into the enemy army, then this is difficult because you're going to be chasing the thing that's going to explode. But if you're an army that wants to sit back, or if they're an enemy army running towards you, the explosion range is 12 inches, right? No, the explosion range is 6 inches plus the number on the dice next to the spell. So it varies between 7 and 12 inch range is the range of it. And it does also hurt your own armies. That's correct. It's only D3 mortal wounds. What's going to run at it? It is only D3 mortal wounds. It's only D3 mortal wounds to multiple units. But it works really well if you can combo loads of other AoE damage as well. And would work quite well with Horrigast in many ways. That's a nice little loadout spell-wise already at the top. Geminids first, and then pick your damage spell. And then, you don't... I think Horrigast maybe has to go down just because of how good Geminids is. I don't know. Why has Cogs gone up and got worse? It's a great question. I don't know. This works really nice in Soulblight Gravelords as well. Like, it's really nice in Soulblight Gravelords where you cast a spell on a 9 that does 2 mortal wounds to each model in the enemy army, and then you explode Maelstrom on them. So they're going to be taking 2 plus D3 mortal wounds on a ton of models in the army. Is Geminids and Horrorgas good? Potentially. It's a lot of points, though. You're talking 110 points. Horrorgas is just a worse version of Geminids. There's one bonus thing that you get about Horrorgas, which I think why it's worth staying in A, is that D3 additional models run away. So if you are fighting something like 9 Storm Fiends, you can make them ignore Battle Shock, for example, with the Geminids. But with Horrorgas, an additional D3 run away, that's actually pretty spicy. So on multi-wound models, an additional D3 run away is so good. In my personal opinion. So, yeah. Okay. Which is next? Let's go. Prismatic Palisade. Ooh, okay. So it's cast on a 7 and a range of 18 inches. If you get me a points value, please, chat. And you set it up. A range of 18 inches. Let's start there. Huge range. Effective range. Massive. 18 inches. If you have abilities to make it go longer, even further. Right? And then you got Blinding Light. After this end of spell, yeah, Spirit Gale in Soulblight Gravelords and Maelstrom is stonks. That's all I'm going to say. That's so good. 40 points for this. 40 points for the Prismatic Palisade. So after this end of spell set up, at the start of each subsequent hero phase, roll a dice for each unit within 6 inches of this endless spell, and on a 3+, a unit cannot make a shooting attack in that turn. Add 3 inches to the range of this ability at the start of each battle round, after the turn in which the end of spell was unbound. So it's cheap. It's 40 points. It's obviously anti-shooting. It feels like it's actually anti-unleash hell. So if you cast this, after after the end of spell set up, roll dice for each unit within 3 inches. On 3+, you can make shooting attacks in that turn, which is nice. The base is also huge, which is good. Thanks, Dave, for resubscribing. 24-inch range, yeah. 6 inches plus the 18-inch setup, so it's got a big spell range, which is a bonus. It's cheap. And then it's going to get bigger. It's going to go 24, 27, 30. Oh, it's going to be 6 inches, 9 inches, and then 12 inches eventually. So you might be able to really shut down a shooting phase from the enemy army. My problem is it's actually fairly limited, 6 inches. And then even when it goes up to 9 inches, you could probably, as a shooting unit, move outside of that. Most of the shooting units that we see are very mobile. KO, very mobile. Blitzbarb Archers, very mobile. So you don't generally tend to have a lot of static gun lines. This feels like it's something from the past. So I think that that's an issue. And ultimately, it's situationally good into a meta that might not exist and is kind of okay. So I think I don't even know if you can justify it. Maybe be aware it exists. Maybe if shooting's a thing. But I don't know if you could ever really justify it, to be honest. It's not ever going to do, and it's on a 3+. That's the other thing as well. You can't, it's not even you definitely, Geminids is a 2+, right? This is a 3+. In fact, I'm going to argue that you can't justify it. I don't think. I don't think you're going to justify it at all. I don't think there's ever going to be a situation where you could justify it. Be interesting. Okay, so yeah, that's what we're going to settle it out, I think. We're going to settle it out as being can't justify. I feel like that's fair. Okay, next up. The Purples. Girls just want to have fun. Girls just... Or Purple Rain. Purple Rain. Whatever you want. Okay. Purple Sun. Yeah. Is cast on an 8 and a range of 8 inches. And I think it's 90 points. I'll get that double checked. So 8 inches is how you set it up, and it's predatory, so it's going to move at the end of each hero phase, but before end of hero phase abilities. This end of spell is predatory end of spell. It can be moved up to 8 inches. It can fly. So it's got a 16-inch effective range on the turn it cast. It's also cast on an 8. So you more than likely will need primal dice to cast it. But the Purple Sun is kind of back in this GHB. Because while it's definitely easier to get rid of end of spells because of primal dice, it's back because it's also easier to cast in this GHB because you've got primal dice. In fact, there should be more Purple Suns on the tabletop because you should be able to get more out of them. Let's see. Now, it's got end given form. Subtract 1 from save rolls for attacks that target units while they're within 6 inches of any end of spells. That's going to be enemy and friendly, which is a huge... I've said this before. Mystic Shield is the best spell you can cast in the game. Being able to reduce the save by 1 is the same force multiplier that you can apply. Obviously, this costs points. Mystic Shield doesn't, apart from getting a wizard. But this is really impactful, being able to reduce the enemy save down by 1. While they're within 6 inches of any end of spells with this ability. And that's a pretty big range, because it's 16 inches and then 6 inches. So that's 22-inch range that you can affect in the first turn. Almost all of the battle plans, you start 18 inches away in this GHB. So you should be able to affect units on the first turn, which is good. And then, finally... in addition, you roll dice for each unit within 1 inch of this end of spell after this end of spell has moved. On a 1, the unit has been touched by the Purple Sun's rays. It's just a funny sentence. I can't get past that. If that unit has a wounds characteristic of 9 or less, 1 on that unit is slain. So you can just yeet characters. You just murder... so many characters. You can just put them down into the hole. And then if not, otherwise, if it's a monster, it's D6 plus 6 mortal wounds. This is fantastic. And I think I'd like to probably try to find a place for this in any of my armies. Because that raw output, because it's kind of thing that's got a little bit more interesting. And if you haven't watched it yet, I did a show about my first GHB thoughts. It's on the Honest Wargamer Streams YouTube channel, or as a podcast, I think, both of which are available. Go listen to it. I talk about the fact that a lot of units in the game now that are 300, 400 points in the game, like especially monstrous models, are in a much worse place than they were last GHB because of just people yeeting 46 mortal wounds at them as often as they can. This kind of does the same thing, and it costs you points. So you might see this less because you've got Blizzard, which is the 46 mortal wound spell, in your army. But... your unique characters, your non-Andorian Locus casters, so Arcan as an example, Croak as an example, Nagash as an example, can be cast in this spell. So you could do Blizzard in one place, and then your Purple Sun's your other one as well, which is nice. And I really like this. I think this is good. Now, I know it's expensive. because it's 80 points. But, I don't have a problem with it. It's a good... It does 2 things, which is important. It's a force multiplier because it effectively makes a unit -1 save. It's already great. And it's also a damage dealer. Both of which are really good. It doesn't have, the pure output potential of, let's say, Maelstrom. But it can just auto-delete characters, which is pretty crazy. It's on a big base, which is really good. So that 6-inch aura is going to be really big. Which I think is fun. Lots of the armies that are playing right now and doing quite well have fairly good armor saves, so it's worth getting those. I think this is an A. Yeah, I think this is an A. I think this is a great take. I think this is a great take all the time. And it has a lot of threat as well. Moves 8 inches. It has a 9-inch threat range at the end of each hero phase. Your opponent has a 9-inch or 18 inches really, because it goes 9 inches in either direction, where it's I've got to be careful that I'm not going to take D6 plus 6 mortal wounds from this. I think it's really good. Really good. In fact, probably my ordering for this so far is probably Purple Sun, Maelstrom. That's probably my list so far, is the way it works. So, yeah, very, very good. Yeah, and also, yeah, that's the other point as well, because it's got such a high casting value. Even with Primal Dice, trying to stop it is not a guarantee. I mean, on average, it's a guarantee. 3 primal dice, you should be rolling a 10 or 11 to dispel this spell. But it's not a guarantee. Like, you still maybe failing it. And yeah, and also, good point by Mark, you're forcing your opponent to use primal dice to get rid of it. And it's kind of fun as well. Like, because if you load up on Purple Sun and Blizzard in your army, your opponent has got to choose what they want to try and get rid of with their primal dice that turn. So you could probably try to overload them so that their primal isn't going to be as effective, which is interesting. Anyway, yeah, good. All right, Purple Sun, love that. Love that. Then we got the Quicksilver Swords, or formerly as they're known, the Racist Swords. They're cast on a 6 and got a range of 6 inches. And if successfully cast it up, the end of the spell wholly within the range of the caster, so 6 inches out. And they move 8 inches, so 14 inches is their first turn threat range. And after this end of the spell's moved, you can pick one unit that has any models it passed across and roll 12 dice. For each 5+ unit suffers a mortal wound, and in addition, mortal wounds caused by this ability cannot be negated. So it's not got the biggest range, 14 inches, and you need to move across it. And you need to have moved across the unit. So it doesn't have as much. It's 60 points, thanks to Brown Mate in the chat. So it's just a damage dealer. It doesn't have... I mean, you can't do ward saves, or you can't negate those mortal wounds, which is quite rare. Normally, there's a lot of ward saves now in the game. But it's a damage dealer. We need to compare it to the other damage dealers. It doesn't have the potential output of the 3 in a Great Take, so Pendulum or Maelstrom or Purple Sun. Doesn't have that output. It doesn't have the range of most of those as well. I know Maelstrom is shorter, but it's got... Not Maelstrom, sorry. Pendulum is shorter, but it's got more output. The no wards thing is super nice as well. So you can't negate them, so you could catch some people out. And you could roll lots of 5-ups on 12 dice, but you should roll 4, which is not enough to kill a character. So I don't think it makes anywhere than B. And I think it's somewhere between B and C, if I'm honest. It doesn't even do anything situationally. Just trying to think if it just goes, I can't justify it, because I don't think I can justify it. I really can't. I think Pendulum, you don't like, it might have more consistent damage over time, but Pendulum's job is to be cast at very short range. So if you build the right army, if you build an army that's going to have an aggressive front line, let's say Mortek Guard, not that you see a lot of that, but I guess a Mortis Guard would be the OBR equivalent. You put a Mortis Guard in a line and you have a Bone Shaper behind them. The reason you have the Bone Shaper behind them, or like you have a caster, Arcan behind them, someone behind the front line. And the reason you have those behind the front line is because they're doing some healing or they're protecting them, right? And you just then put Pendulum on the other side. Then you're immediately hitting their units that are charging you. So if they multi-charge you with a couple of models, you're potentially doing 2d6 mortal wounds into their army. Probably take Purple Sun in that case, to be honest, but still. Like, not negating it is a big deal. That's obviously super true. Pendulum is d6 to maybe many units. Yes, that's what I'm saying. There's more potential output with Pendulum. Pendulum is a bigger skill expression, but you get a bigger reward out of Pendulum. So I think you could be aware it exists, but like I'm not super sold on it, to be honest. I wouldn't take it. I would rather try and put myself in a position where a Pendulum is going to do devastating damage than do 4 damage. But I guess it's 4 damage each hero phase. That equals 8 damage. That's pretty good. But then similarly, Pendulum, if it goes right, if you end up on a double, yeah. But they should be dispelling all these endless spells anyway. Like, all these endless spells should be getting dispelled with primal dice. So it shouldn't matter too much. Okay, Ravenax Nash in Jaws. It's cast on a 6 and a range of 8 inches. And it's predatory, so it's going to move at the end of each hero phase, but before end of hero phase effects. It can be moved up to 3d6 inches and can fly. You can reroll the dice to determine how far this endless spell can move if it's summoned in the same turn. And after this endless spell is moved, you pick one unit that any models it passed across, and on a 2+, the roll for this endless spell's move was greater than the unit's move characteristic. The unit suffers a number of mortal wounds equal to the difference rounding down. So this is great into slow armies, obviously. And this is 70 points. Thank you in the chat to Nico. It's 70 points, great into slow armies. Not all the armies are slow, and also you generally tend to see fast units in Age of Sigmar because fast units are better than slow units. You don't see, like, while the average movement in Age of Sigmar, if you were to take all the War Scrolls, might be like medium, because fast units are better in any game system, then the competitive scene tends to skew towards fast. Therefore, this makes it slightly less effective. But there are ways to obviously reduce movement and movement characteristics in some armies, so you can combo this quite nicely. And it can sometimes just do bonkers amounts of mortal wounds, which is really nice. And it's going to do those bonkers amount of mortal wounds in every single hero phase. And then its range is determined on how much damage it's likely to do as well. Because you roll 3d6, should be between a 10 and 11. But if you roll really high, like an 18, then you're doing more mortal wounds. It's like a win more condition for the spell, which I think is interesting. Are you considering the size of the spells, their ability to block lanes? Not really, but that's a good point as well. At 60 points, 70 points, I'm not sure you should consider them for blocking lanes. But yes, obviously, there's also that as well. I'd say just be aware it exists. And I think in some situations it's going to work very, very well. But for 70 points, you spend 10 more points, you got a Purple Sun. You're reducing their armor save down. It's got a nice first turn threat range. So if you're I'm going to deploy this, and then I'm going to try and do some damage to you early. Maybe kill some of your screening units so I can do a charge. It's not bad as a shout at all. But I think definitely it goes in B. I just don't think it makes it into A at all. I don't know. Maybe it and Pendulum. Just trying to think. I think maybe B. I think B's fine. It requires units to be slow, right? Jaws ate 3 units of my Arkanauts in 3 turns. That's big sexy in the chat. Arkanauts are one of the examples where you do have slow models in the game because they're in a fast boat, which is quite funny. Yeah, for 10 more points, you take Maelstrom and Geminids. There you go. Oh, Maelstrom and Geminids together for the same price as... Oh, my God. Yes, that's way better. Okay. All right. Soul Snare Snare Shackles. Now, this has got 3 parts to the end of the spell. It's cast on 7, it moves 8 inches. And if successfully cast, you set up the parts to the end of the spell wholly within 3 inches of each other and wholly within range of the caster, which is 8 inches. It's 40 points for these, thanks to Nico in the chat. So 8 inches, and then they're 3 inches of each other. At the start of the movement phase, roll a dice for each unit within 6 inches. So you're probably already casting it at your own army, or where your own army wants to be. Subtract the result from this unit's movement characteristic. So you roll a dice for each unit within 6 inches of this turn of spell. Subtract the result from this unit's move characteristic to a minimum of 0 until the end of that phase. In addition, if a unit's move characteristic is reduced to 0, you suffer D3 mortal wounds. Now this is this is cheap, 40 points, and you could obviously mix this in with the Jaws if you wanted to. Ravenax Nash and Jaws to try and combo and do a ton of mortal wounds. But most of the time you're just casting this straight into your own army. You rarely have a wizard on the front of the lines who then wants to cast a spell in front of its own army, which feels weird. There might be some deep striking units that you maybe are going to do this on. But if you're going to deep strike those units or teleport those units, you're maybe going to cast Blizzard. But this is just too difficult to use, in my opinion. And this is going to cause you some nightmares. So I'll probably put it in Don't Take It. Because you're just going to mess your own army up. Maybe in a very unique situation it's going to work. But it's just range is so limited. If it's 12 inches set up, then yeah. And I know there are some armies that can extend that range, which isn't loads of armies. So you can extend it to 14 inches and put it in the middle of the board. But the middle of the board is where all the objectives are. So you've already let them get to the place where they've got to. So they don't care about moving past that point, in my personal opinion. So I'd say that's a no from me. Don't take it. Don't take it. Suffocating Grey Tide. Interesting. Cast on a 6 and a range of 8 inches. It's got a massive base. Absolutely huge. And this end of spell is a Predator end of spell, and it can be moved up to 12 inches and can fly. So it's got a 20-inch range when it gets cast, and it's 30 points. So it's in, thank you to Nico. It's 30 points, so it's competing with like the cheapest spells there are. So cheap. It's got Pull to the Grave ability. After this end of spell's moved, for each unit that has any models it passed across, roll a number of dice equal to the number of models in that unit. For each 5+ they suffer a mortal wound. This is the anti-horde meta. If you've got 2 units of zombies, 2 units of 60 stabbers in gits, you're going to do 20 mortal wounds to each of those 2 units if you get within range. That's crazy potential output. That's 40 mortal wounds. That only works into hordes, of course. Although, you know, even 10-person units is going to do 2 or 3 mortal wounds. It's got a massive base, and it moves 12 inches, so you might be able to affect a lot of models, which is quite nice. Yeah, and even averaging 2 mortal wounds on a unit of 10 is not bad. Yeah, I think it does potentially a lot of damage, and it's crazy cheap. And also, yes, as we talked about in the chat, a very big base. So if you wanted to try and use it to move block, now with endless spells, you can move over endless spells, but you must complete the movement. So if you want, you could put this like just past an inch in front of your lines, so then your opponent is going to struggle to charge your lines and has to go around and attack on the side. So they might not be able to do enough. I'd actually say that this goes up here. I think it's a great take. I think in loads of situations this is good. Like, I'm not saying it's the best in a great take, but it's so cheap. It's so cheap. And if you, like, and some of the lists that we've been talking about, good example would be Reign of Stars from last year, where it fails what we call the DPS check, which is doing enough damage to hordes. This is your 30 points. This just does enough damage to hordes. I don't have to worry about it. Like, this is just like, okay, there's some hordes on the board. This is going to do a ton of mortal wounds for me, right? The fact that it's all units is wild. Oh, it's 40 points. Thank you very much. But 40 points is still just the same conversation, in my opinion, so thank you. The fact it's all units is wild. The fact that it's all units is wild. It's like Stellar Tempest. Yeah, it's so good. It's all units. Right? No, it is 30. Is it 30? Okay, it's either 30 or 40. Someone in the chat's got to be the guy on the numbers for me. It goes in A, and I think it's great. It's going to get unbound all the time, but you got a good threat range on it. It's 20 inches on the first turn, in my opinion. Also, just load up on cheap. Go Geminids, Maelstrom, and Suffocating Gravetide. Be like, I spent less than 100 points on endless spells. Yeah? Use your primal dice to get rid of these. Just casting dice. My situation is just like, I'm just doing mortal wounds and stopping you doing command abilities. I think Maelstrom, Gravetide, and Geminids for sub 100 points is bananas. Bananas, right? Also, yeah, Geminids is just ruins OBR. I've just realised. Yeah, like, OBR dead in the water. I like they gave you command abilities and then they took them away again. Sucks to suck. Hey, Swaggy. Hope you're doing well. Shout out to the big tall drink of water. There's Michael Roush in the chat. Right, okay, next one. The Burning Head. Yikes. It's cast on 6. It's got range of 8 inches. Set up within 8. It's a predatory in the spell and it moves 8 inches as well. That's why they don't need nerf OBR. The Geminids is a sleeve. That's true. I said no merit OBR gets slammed by Geminids. That's true and correct. 30 points for the Burning Head, apparently. Can someone just check that for me? I will throw these hands at whoever plays Geminids. So if it makes use primal dice. Burning Head is worse. Burning Head is terrible, right? Yeah. Burning Head is 30 points. Thank you. It's got the ability Flaming Skull. After this end of spell is moved, the commanding player can pick one enemy unit within an inch of this end of spell and roll a dice. On a 2+, this end of spell is treated as part of that enemy unit until either that unit is destroyed or the end of spell is dispelled, at which point the end of spell is removed from play. While this end of spell is part of the unit, at the end of each movement phase, roll a dice. On a 2+, that unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. It's cast on an 8, and it's cast on 6 in range of 8 inches, so it's got 16 inch threat range. It's one unit takes D3 mortal wounds. I wouldn't take it if it was 10 points. So it's going, don't take it. It just goes straight at the bottom. It's a unit takes D3 mortal wounds. So I don't need that in my life. On a 2+, like just spend more points. This definitely has a place in Nurgle. Well, interesting, according to Lex. Let's listen to this. Cast by a Rotbringer sorcerer makes the enemy unit one massive disease spreader. Okay. Alright, you can use a spell to extend the range of combat wizard weapons. Interesting. Because it becomes part of the model and therefore has an extended range on its base. That's such a weird situation. That's such a weird, like people used to do with Archon. But 30 points after we've seen Suffocating Gravetide. I don't think Nurgle thing actually, either if it works or doesn't work, like those unique situations, I couldn't justify it even in those situations. And I just wouldn't take it, in my personal opinion. I think that's a no from me. Especially when it's competing with Geminids, Maelstrom, and Gravetide, as an example. Or even Purple Sun. You can only take 3 as well, so there's that. Umbral Spell Portal. Ooh, how the mighty have fallen. It's cast on a 5, so it's very easy to cast. And it's got a range of 18 inches, which is nice. If successfully cast it at one part of this end spell within an inch of the caster, then set up the other part wholly within range of the caster. Okay, so they've got to be within 18 inches of each other. There are 2 parts, and it costs 80 points. Thank you very much. What you can effectively do, long story short, is cast a spell through this portal. And then you measure from the other side of the portal. You can also put one endless spell through it. You can only cast one endless spell through it. And a change from last edition to this edition is that you must measure. You can measure to the other portal to unbind. So there are 2 portals, one next to the wizard and one at the other side. And then the other side is where you can measure the effective spell ranges from. It used to be that you had to be near the wizard to try to stop the spell. Now you can measure to the bit that's close to your army, the one that's 18 inches away. Oh, no endless spells through it. Are we sure? Initial once per turn, if a predatory endless spell starts to move wholly within 6 inches of this endless spell, instead of make a move with it, the commanding player can remove the predatory endless spell from battlefield and set up again. Yes, you can. You can't cast an endless spell through it. But once per turn, if a predatory endless spell starts to move wholly within range, so you can put endless spells through it. You just can't cast through it. No, I never said you could cast through it. You can effectively you cast it in a spell, you set it up within range, and then it goes through the portal and ends up at the other range within 6 inches of the other side. So it's not massively important, but it's fun, and that's how it's worked for a long time. The setup is a big change. Agreed. The setup is a big change because now it has to be wholly within 1 inch of your caster and far away, so you can't be moving it around the board as you were previously. It's also a low casting value, and as Alden was pointing out in chat, a lot of people use it to use an incarnate that eats endless spells and levels up, which is what we've seen. But 80 points to cast a singular spell. Can't be Blizzard. But obviously you're still probably going to use it with Techless to be able to cast the spell through Techless. You might use it in some other armies as well, but 80 points is a massive cost to cast one spell at a range in a game where people can dispel your endless spell, and they've also got primal dice to stop your spells. So, I think this is. I mean, it was previously right at the top, but I don't even know if you can justify it. I really don't. I don't even know if it's justifiable. Like, it was always very, very expensive. I personally just don't want this to be in the game at all. I'm glad this has been nerfed into almost obscurity, because I think the spell ranges are intended when they wrote it, and they didn't keep writing to themselves, I wonder what happens if someone does a portal with this every time. So I'm not overly stressed by this. But I don't think I could justify it. But maybe in the best situation with the right wizard, so you can castify it. Usually, if someone's played spell portal, it's probably for some reasons. Yes, agreed. So I'm going to put in can't justify it. All right, we're nearly there. Pretty exciting. Screen Bridge. Again, how the mighty have fallen. I think this costs 80 points. It's in 2 parts, massive bases. So if you do want to block again in front of your army, that's a real good spell to do. This Ender spell has a spell that has a casting value of 6 and a range of 18 inches. If successfully cast, set one part up within an inch of the caster, set the other part up wholly within range of the caster. Yeah, yikes. This is a big yikes, in my opinion. At the start of the movement phase, the player whose turn is taking place can remove 1 for any unit. Basically, you can teleport a unit across it. I don't need to read it through. You start a unit within 6 inches, you teleport, you have to be within 6 inches on the other side. The unit removed and set up again in this way cannot make a normal move after, so you just basically do a teleport. It's 80 points to teleport 1 unit, but when you teleport them there, they cannot issue or receive commands until the start of the next hero phase, which means you can't do reroll charges. You can't do something that might give you a 3d6 charge. You can't do a bunch of different stuff. So you do a teleport and you're just 9 inches away, but it costs you 80 points. Now, if you've got a shooting unit, that's still great, although you can't give them all-out attack. So it's kind of worse because you'll probably want to teleport a unit and give +1 attack. So that's a problem. Yeah, as Owens pointed out in the chat, the reason we probably saw this change was because of what was happening. I think 2 reasons. We saw it in Slaves to Darkness a lot with some Varangard, and we saw it in Carriage and Overlords because of Thunderers. Those are the 2 reasons that we did previously see it. But, I mean, it's always been a bit of a problem in the game. Because you've either sent loads of units through it, or even you've sent 1 unit that could work really well. I don't think I can justify it. I'd probably say don't even take it. I think can't justify it. Mainly because it's got 2 massive bases for blocking board space. Like, 80 points to do that is a lot. But if you're like, I want to just make it so my opponent cannot charge me, or is really going to struggle, you can take that and Gravetide and just shut the front of your army down with Ender spells, so it's difficult to charge through. Chosen Bomb 2, that's true. Moon Tyranid, only reason for this is 20 pinks in Zinch. That's a great shout. With Hoarfrost cast on them, put them through here, then they can use Destiny Dice to charge. So I would just put it down here, in my opinion. I don't think it does stuff. You can't justify it, and if you are justifying it, then it's for a very unique situation. The Shards of Valagar. Again, 2 large bases, very much like the bridge. It's cast. It's got 2 parts to it. It's cast on a 5, so it's very easy to eat if you want to be an incarnate, and a range of 18 inches. If successfully cast, you set up the parts to send the spell wholly within 8 inches of each other and wholly within range of the caster. So it's 18 inches from the caster. It's 40 points for the Shards of Valagar, thank you. And it's a Predator in the spell, but you move 1 of the 2 pieces of this each time. So you don't move all of it. You change one where one of them moves all the time, so it kind of like it moves across like checkers or something. And you set it up again wholly within 8 inches of the other piece. And while they're within 6 inches of any endless spells with this ability, so this is Ensnaring Soul Drain, units cannot fly or be removed from the battlefield with an effect that would allow them to be set up again in the same turn. In addition, units can be set up within 6 inches of this endless spell. So this is pretty good. So while they're within 6 inches of any endless spells with this ability, so basically these 2 big bases, which are 8 inches apart, and it's 6 inches, and the base is about 2 inches. So we're going to say that the spell itself has got an effective range of 12 inches, and then you add 6 inches either side. So this is going to cover like 24 inches of the board with this ability, which is huge portion of the board, which is crazy. Units cannot fly or be removed from the battlefield, so no teleports, no flying, with an effect that will allow them to be set up again the same turn. In addition, units cannot be set up within 6 inches of the spell. So, do you want to shut down graveyards? That's a great shout. Do you want to shut down teleporting, deep strikes, any of these things? Like, these are 40 points. Like, this is really good in the right situation. Really, really good. I think it's still situational into the right armies, but lots of those armies are going to be doing. I like the idea of setting this up, like casting this right next to a Loon Shrine, so no models could come back, which is dope. Cast it next to Nagash, so you can't summon any. Does that work? I think maybe you can do it next to him. I like this quite a lot, given prevalence of Chaos, Oblak, Gravelord, Seraphon, and any summoning army. It's pretty good. It's got a big range. It's got a very big range. Sylvaneth Strike and Fade as well. That's a great shout. Oh, that's horrible into Sylvaneth. What a great point. Yeah, because they teleport. Wow. Wow. Hurts Beast of Chaos as well. I hate to mention that, but it's just true. I think you have to play it well, but for 40 points. Yeah. So I'm going to struggle here. I'm going to say a great take. I'm going to put Shards as a great take. Like, I really do. I think. Same cost as Burn Ahead, though, so tough decision. I say Spelly Good. I'm thinking of moving Maelstrom into Spelly Good. It's so cheap. Like, I really do think. Anyway, I would potentially put Maelstrom up with Geminids. Geminids is obviously so good. It's almost in its own category. But Maelstrom's up there as well. And ultimately, Shards of Valagor is only good into... Although it shuts down summoning. It shuts down summoning, teleports, recursion. Like, it shuts down lots of different armies for a small investment. It does. Yes, very good. It's very good. In my opinion. Very, very good. I'm going to put this here as well because it's so cheap. I think that's about right. Probably the hardest spell to use potential-wise. Maelstrom isn't great in quite a lot of lists. You need to have spell volume to make it worthwhile. You don't need to. Don't forget slain models will activate Maelstrom. Super important to remember that slain models. Like, it works in spellcasting and shooting armies really well. So, even if, like, would Shards stop rally? Would Shards stop rallying? No. I don't think so, because it's units that set up. Units, not models. So it wouldn't stop rally. Okay, finally, Lack1, the Soul Seeker. The Journeyman, the Boatman, taking us to the end of the video. Cast on 6 and a range of 6 inches. Predatory. You can activate Maelstrom with a good anti-horde spell. What a combo. Throw Gravetide in and Maelstrom at the same time. Do Mortal Wounds with Maelstrom. And Mortal Wounds with Gravetide and then activate Maelstrom. Stonks for days. Absolutely adore that. I think that's great. 50 points for the boat. It's a predatory under spell. You set it within 6 and it moves 18 inches. Before a commanded player moves this under spell, they can pick one friendly wizard with a wounds character of 9 or less, wholly within 3 inches of this under spell. Remove that wizard from the battlefield. After this under spell is moved, set that wizard up again, wholly within 3 inches of this under spell, and more than 9 inches from enemy units. After this wizard has been set up, suffers a mortal wound, the wizard can make a normal move or a run in the following movement phase. So obviously previously we saw this in Thanquol, and pretty much the only time we ever saw this previously was with Thanquol. So it allows you to move a wizard up the board, but at the end of the hero phase. So you've got to really ask yourself, I mean, I think there's some situations where there's a wizard who's got an aura, they've got a command trait that's really good, or they've got an aura that's really good, and you want them to be a little bit faster. But 50 points for that mobility, which is too fast in many ways, is a problem. Do primal dice count as modifiers for extra dice for casting spells? Yes. Primal dice count as modifiers? Yes, they do. It says that in the core rules. Yeah, Slap Rat still lives, though, of course. Of course, you can still do that. I don't know. I think that there's going to be very few situations where you're going to want to put a wizard in the boat. Most foot heroes in Age of Sigmar are pretty weak source. So there isn't really like a combat foot hero that you're going to want to throw into the enemy army. There are some cases, but not loads of cases, where you might want that mobility for 50 points to put an assassin-style character against the enemy. But you still have to be 9 inches away. They get to move after, so then they got a more competent charge, which I think is kind of fun. Yeah, you could use the twins. Not the twins from Orange, but just the twins. Kado's a good example as well. Going to boat a Kabbalist Karkadrak Lord. It's pretty interesting. So it's not useless, but I think it's going to be the same as Can't Justify It. I think it's going to be, in some situations, you're going to do it, but very, very rarely. Very rarely. Which is probably true for everything in the Can't Justify It tier. I would say it's the same as the bridge, right? It's the same as the bridge, Palisade, Portal. Portal probably goes higher in that situation. Yeah, and I think there we are. That is the Endless Spill tier list. In my personal opinion, those are the spells that you'll see so useful. And if you are thinking about getting Endless Spells, these are the ones that I would take. I think some of them are really stand out. I think the three that really stand out to me are Maelstrom, Suffocating Gravetide, and Geminids, just because of how incredibly cheap they are as a 3-spell loadout. I think Purple's, like, if you wanted to be a little bit more of an aggro player, it's more expensive, but Purple Sun and also the Pendulum for just, and Geminids, for just a pure raw amount of damage output, which I think is really, really fun for doing a ton of damage, especially when you combine it with something like Blizzard. You'll be doing a lot of mortal wounds in that situation, which I think is really good. But Geminids is just so good against the enemy that you're going to use it as much as you can. So I would personally like just paint those up and use them all the time. Yeah, and I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please do let me know if you have enjoyed it, and I would like to know what you want to like, what endless spells you think are in what tiers. I'll include the link to the tier makers so you can make your own tier lists. If you do make your own tier list and put them on social media, please do tag the Honest Wargamer in this video. That'd be cool. I'll link that down below. And I want to shout out the chat. My favorite thing about creating content is that I get to stream and I get to create videos with the chat. There's lots of really clever Age of Sigmar players in the chat, and there's lots of idiots as well. There's loads of really clever players and loads of fun players, and they bring their insight. Learning an Age of Sigmar army is an incredibly complicated process. So complicated to do it individually. And so they're all bringing their experiences from their armies into it as well. Becomes more cohesive, and hopefully that makes a better video. So I really appreciate and value the Twitch shout. So shout out to you. I think you're all great. And I'm sure they've got some opinions about where these spells should sit as well. If you have enjoyed the video, you can support me by... Oh, I probably should say, if anyone is interested, that you can buy Honest Wargamer dice. That's right, you can buy Honest Wargamer dice now on the honestwargamer.com if you go onto our store, and you can pick up our dice, especially if you think about casting spells. We've got some Primal dice. I'll include them in the show notes. We've got some Primal dice, but we've also got some Honest Wargamer dice. Honest Wargamer Red, Honest Wargamer Blue, which is super fun. So I'll include those in the links if you want to go grab them. And thanks for listening to the show, the video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks very much.